Well, good morning. It's always great to be back in the great United Kingdom. I want to start with a story. It begins on a cold, dreary morning off the coast of France. 06:35 a.m., June 6th, 1944. Many of you probably know that date, D-Day. My father, Kenneth Braithwaite Sr., was a young private in the very first wave in the third landing craft to touch the sand that morning at Normandy. If you all have seen the movie Saving Private Ryan, you've seen what my father lived through. Sheer hell. When I went to see that movie, Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks did an incredible job to capture the true terror of what warfare was all about. My wife couldn't make it through the first 5 minutes. She left. Me, I was transfixed. Transfixed not for what I was watching, but for what I thought about my father, who was 18 years old when he came across that sand that morning. First thing I did when I left the theater was call my dad. I said, "Dad, how did you do that? How did you exit that landing craft when all that chaos was coming at you?" My dad, being a very simple guy, said, "Well, son, it was my duty." I said, "Dad," at this point I was a lieutenant commander in the Navy, a pilot. I said, "I know about duty. I know about honor. I know about country. But Dad, that was sheer suicide. What made you do it?" There was a pause on the phone. He says, "Well, I guess it was the guy to my left, the guy to my right, and I wasn't going to let down General Roosevelt." Leadership. Leadership is at the center of everything we do. General Eisenhower talked about the art of leadership. It was getting people to do things, not because you tell them to do them, but because you inspire them to choose to do those things. Since I was a young Boy Scout, I've had the great honor of leading people at all echelons of life. And as I have come to realize in that journey, leadership is not something you ever master. Because in every organization or enterprise, leadership is just a little bit different. And so, as President Kennedy once said, leadership and learning are indispensable to one another. But it starts with one thing. It starts with people. I had the good fortune of studying under a very famous admiral you've never heard of. Her name was Grace Murray Hopper. Admiral Hopper had the honor of creating the ENIAC computer at the University of Pennsylvania. That was the first of the new technologies of the 20th century. And she talked about leadership and management. She said, "You manage things, but you lead people." When I was a midshipman at the Naval Academy, I had a fantastic senior officer and leader who told us when we left that our challenge to learn was going to be taught by the people that we served with, that we served under. And we should keep a little journal and write down in that journal the things that inspired us by those whom we reported to, and conversely, write down the things that demoralized us. Of course, replicating the first and never the second. I reported aboard my first aircraft carrier, and I was very fortunate to have a great leader, a gentleman by the name of Jim Gramps-Lair. He'd been flying airplanes since before I was born, but he taught me and my shipmates the core essence of leadership when it came to people. You see, when you're the commanding officer of an aircraft carrier, you're on your way to being an admiral. Unless one mistake is made. And that mistake might not be of your doing, but in my profession, the commanding officer is ultimately responsible for everything that happens on that ship. There are 5,000 people on an aircraft carrier. There are 75 aircraft being launched and recovered. There is no way that any one person can govern all those moving parts and pieces. And Admiral Lair knew that. But most commanding officers never leave the bridge of their ship. They spend 15 months in command of an aircraft carrier, and they rarely sleep. They rarely eat. They've spent 25 to 30 years to get to that point, to command that ship. And on the mistake of one other person, all could be over. Not old Gramps-Lair, he left that bridge of that ship. He went down 17 stories to the bottom of the ship to talk to each and every one of us, to get to know all 5,000. Of course, you don't get to know everybody. But leadership starts with knowing your people, being with your people, spending time, letting them get to know you as the person that you are. Everything we do revolves around that dynamic, the dynamic of people. The dynamic of risk, of why you came here this morning, of what Kristen introduced to you, new concepts, new ideas. We have a saying in the U.S. Navy by the father that created us, beat the British right off the coast here. His name was John Paul Jones. And he said, "He who does not risk shall not win." To be a leader then is to delegate, is to empower your people to make decisions on behalf of the enterprise and trust them to make those decisions. To be a leader is to own the decisions of others. When General Eisenhower became president, he said the hardest thing for him to do was to sign documents that he never had time to read. He had to trust those who brought him those documents. But he also had learned that you need to own the failures of those subordinates that you've delegated to. On D-Day, where my father was, the day didn't go so well. And as the reports came back to General Eisenhower, he felt that he had failed. Remember, he wasn't there. He was here in London. But being a leader, he took ownership for what he believed were the failures on that beach that morning. And he wrote a letter of resignation to the President of the United States. Thankfully for him, the tide turned, forces went ashore, the rest, they say, is history. And just like the leader he was, General Eisenhower didn't take the credit. He deflected the credit onto those who were there, who were doing the job. So a leader is prepared to take the risk, accept the blame, and deflect the credit to others. One of the things that we learn in the Navy is that nothing is more important than the ship. It is the enterprise that you are part of that is the most important thing. Why? Because if the ship sinks if we don't do our job on behalf of the enterprise, we all lose. So in the hierarchy of any organization, it should always be the ship, then your shipmate, and then yourself. Your responsibility should be to the enterprise. If the company goes out of business, you all lose your livelihood. And then your next commitment should be with those with whom you serve. Because no organization, no institution can achieve things without the teamwork that comes from the others you work with, and the commitment that you have to them, that you demonstrate each and every day. And then finally, you are an important piece of that overall mosaic, but you're one part. Even the commanding officer of the ship is replaceable. And the ship doesn't get underway just because the commanding officer says, full speed ahead. It's that engineer down in the engine room that turns the valve into the turbine, that gets everything going. Leaders understand and respect everyone in the organization. That is the essence of leadership. And finally, culture. I've talked about this most of my life, and it's something that isn't always tangible. But when you think about it in your own lives, if you think about the organizations that you've personally been part of, they were the ones that had great culture. You were proud to be part of something greater than self. It made you proud to be associated and affiliated with those. That is the magic of the enterprise. And as you embrace the new technologies, you look to the future and you think about the culture that is created, that is what lifts those organizations that become great from those that are mediocre or worse yet fail. But it all starts with leadership. It all starts with the personal interaction between you and the people that you work with. Never forget that. The sixth president of the United States, John Quincy Adams, once wrote, "If you can inspire people to dream more, to learn more, and to do more, then you have achieved what it is to be a leader." Thank you very much.